All right. So, went ahead and saw the data that you sent, and the goal that we had in mind in terms of student mastery was 80% of students showing mastery with 85% or higher in terms of their proficiency on the assessment, right? So I looked at the exit ticket, got the data that I sent you. You're good. Got the data that you sent to me.
Yes.
And so 72% of students mastered the exit ticket, which was writing an ACEs paragraph in response to a text-dependent question.
It was writing an ACEs paragraph in response to an evidence-based claim.
Okay. And so...
But using a text-dependent question to create that claim.
To create that claim. Gotcha.
Yes.
All right. And so you landed really extremely close to that target of 80% with your 72%. What do you believe made you so successful?
One, I think, was the fact that we moved from basic to complex in the activities. We started out, when you saw the mini lesson launch of the fact and opinion, we weren't necessarily looking at that video for the idea of like just what a fact and opinion is, although I did ask it to build some of that background knowledge. It was looking at the opinion from the standpoint of like a reasonable judgment made from facts, so basically being able to back up what they were talking about. We went from there, and that really applied to Station 2. So, and I put this in my reflection that maybe I could have switched some stations around, but Station 1 was simply the text-dependent questions that set the stage for like the knowledge and comprehension, that able to guide their thinking and narrow where they should be looking for their information. And then we went into the graphic organizer of forming that evidence-based claim. So I think building from basic to complex and having those stations that keeps us accountable, both for myself and the students, of like time and urgency, all led into their successes.
Okay. And I'm glad you explained that, because I know in the feedback that I sent via email, and we can talk about it completely, I was just like, what was the purpose of the video? And I think I would have completely understood it had I seen the entire thing in fruition, but seeing that just that small piece, I was really trying to make sense of it as it pertained to the learning target. Which was
citing text-based evidence to support an analysis of
an informational text.
Yes.
Yep. And so I was just like, wait, how does facts, opinion fall
into
this? And so
I use my launches as kind of like that crux, that mini lesson where I can put like my teacher tools in. And so, like I said, we were really looking at the opinion of not just being a feeling, but even if I'm modeling and saying, well, I think this, I'm not putting that on paper, saying like I think, but when I'm thinking about my opinion, it goes beyond a thought. I have this thought because of what I'm taking from the text.
Gotcha.
And making inferences and making judgments about it.
Okay, so what would you overall say is the purpose of the rotations in your classroom? Because that's something you've really implemented with the Station 1, Station 2, Station 3. Like, what's the overall purpose of that on a day-to-day basis when you do actually do it?
So on days, well, we do it pretty much every day. There are some days where the lesson is set up so that we can really move independently, and like I can pull a small group throughout the duration, and others can be on Station 2, others can be on Station 3. For this particular day, we really needed to move as a cohesive unit because it was just how the activities were set up from basic to complex and leading into that ACEs, and I needed to, as a group, hone them in on, okay, we have the knowledge, now we're going to take it a step further, and then let's take it to this final step of like composing writing. But for that day, number one, it's consistent for the students, it's consistent for me, they know what to expect, and it keeps us on a time limit. Like, we're not going to spend all day on text-dependent questions. That's one activity. We need to move to the next thing. So it's just, it sets them up for success. They've expressed that they really like it because they feel, they don't find a sense of comfort necessarily, but they like the consistency of it.
Okay. And so my one piece of feedback to you was in terms of like the modeling. You said that there are about 28% of your students who didn't master the exit ticket. And what do you think attributes to that 28% not having quite grasped the ACEs process or the response?
6 of them are EL students who are on monitoring, and while they understand the components of ACEs, particularly the C of citing the evidence and the E of explaining it, because that's concrete, and they're able to tell their thoughts, they're having issues grappling with the idea of the answer, and especially the summarize. We've really kind of tackled the A, or started to tackle it with, okay, you can take your text-dependent question and turn it into a statement as your answer, and then, or your claim becomes your answer. and just kind of working further on those inferences and then summarizing of how to like bring it all back full circle. And I think some of it is their language. They're very literal. And so working with them on how to take it to the next step. And something that you put in my feedback and I wrote back to you that I agreed with was modeling my thinking, especially on station 1, because I did it on station 2, but you're correct in that I should have gone back on station 1 and really modeled my thinking of like, this is what I'm thinking and here's why. In fact, I did that on the following lessons that day, and then I've done it since, and it's really set them up for success going forward, especially with that first station. And so, like I said, we did it on the second station, and that was intentional because that was a new graphic organizer that they have seen. Well, the layout's not new, but what we were asking them to do with it was new, and so it was very intentional for me to model that. But in addition, if I had pulled those students during that exit ticket time and modeled my thinking for them, it would have set them up for much more success.
Or even prior to that, right?
Right. So for that day, for the exit ticket. But going forward, yes, if I could look at like, okay, in station 1 they're not getting it, I can say, hey, let's pull it. Let's come up here and let me think aloud for you. Let me model what I'm thinking, and then let's go from there. Kind of that guided release.
You want to give the clear what to do's. You want to show them. We talk about setting kids up for success. You want to do that at the highest level possible so that you feel comfortable releasing them, so that when you do walk through and you're seeing that there's still some misconceptions that lie, you can confidently say, I've taught this. I know and see that they don't understand it, and so let me go ahead and pull them back. Because the perfect opportunity for you to have done that, and I only bring that up because in going in at the same time, I think I kept going back and forth between your room and Camilla's room. And so in going in there, I realized that where she was in her lesson, she was having they had a nice, rich discussion, and there was dialogue. She thought aloud about the particular one where it says in paragraph 6, I wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on a floor in friend's room. And the question at the end being what does he mean when he says it wasn't all romantic? She spent a lot of time on that because we talked about the fact that that's a struggle standard for students, right?
L.6.4,
L.6.4,
RI.6.4.
Yep, when you're talking about pulling words like romantic and saying
in context, what does it mean?
In context with the text. And so she had it's clear that she thought about that, had a thorough conversation with students. They talked about it. She said, romantic doesn't have to do with boyfriend, girlfriend, because of course they're sixth graders. So everyone's like, ooh, romantic. No.
Right. And so we actually went, in taking your feedback that you wrote, we did that yesterday, actually. We talked about the idea of, on paragraphs 12 through 14, there was a quote about the heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness. And so we talked about what does heavy mean? And, is it physically heavy for you to pick up being successful? Is it physically heavy for you to pick up a Ferrari or not pick up, but being able to can you pick up the fact that you can afford a Ferrari? No, what he's trying to say is the stress and the struggle versus the new beginning and the freshness. And so I was saying, I think he's trying to say, but I wasn't putting that on paper. And so I was able to model for them out loud, and so it was good for my audio learners. But then I was writing down an academic response, which was really good for my visuals.
For all of your learners, because they need to see how you take that thinking and make it visible on paper.
Right. So and that's something we really talk a lot about. It's how can I, as the writer, make my thinking visible to the reader, but in a rigorous and academic way? They're not mind readers, obviously, but I'm not going to put every single little tidbit down. I need it to come off as formal and clean and really strong. I want to show my knowledge, but I need to do it in a reasonable way.
Right, and then particularly focusing on that A and that S. We know in ACEs, when you're giving your responses, as you write your response, really placing emphasis on the A and the S, knowing that that's a struggle area, especially for your EL students, knowing that about them.
Right, and so I know something we'd also talked about was my launch being a little longer than potentially, what it could have been, and that's just really where I did a lot of my kind of my little teacher tools and my think alouds, and so I think that's something that I need to adjust and be with Camilla on she does it within the activity and I tend to do it before, and I think that's just where my teacher toolbox comes out because I put so much emphasis on the launch.
And now, come to think about it, now I'm fine with that as long as all of that.
It's all aligning,
but not only that, but you're teaching that, you're modeling, you're thinking.
Right.
you're making it visible so you have like an exemplar response for them to work after, because in coming in afterwards and looking at some of the responses, that's why I definitely wanted to see the exit ticket, because I was just like, based on what they're doing in these stations, I'm curious to know what the exit tickets will look like. And granted, 72% is not shabby, right? That's really good. But we're thinking about those still that 28% that was left behind, and what you can do to support them. So what do you think that plan is going to look like in terms of reaching that 28% who didn't reach mastery?
I definitely think, when I'm going around and I'm circulating, really pulling that immediate data, like, for example, after Station 1, while I'm walking around and, like, circulating, like, I need to know that, like, these couple of students aren't getting it, even though I've modeled it. So as the rest go on to Station 2, I can pull them and say, hey, we can't move on yet until I do, a little more explicit reteaching, or I do a little more direct instruction with those particular students.
Right.
I also think that pulling them up, into that small group and just modeling for them again, they definitely where they are, they can't have enough modeling, in my opinion. So, bringing them up and saying, hey, let's model this because I know we're struggling here, and let me reteach it in that way.
Right.
I also think the exposure to, like, continuous prompting and us being really consistent in, like, what I'm asking them and how I'm asking them to do it.
I was going to say that the question that you're asking them to elicit their thinking as well, because you want to model, but allow them time to do the lifting and the thinking and the writing as well, and that comes in with the question that you're asking.
Right, and be able to even lift off of each other and take each other's idea and say, well, okay, but I'm thinking this based off of what you said, because then they're literally practicing the skill in front of me, but in a smaller group setting that moves at the pace that's successful for them.
Okay, so what I hear from this is strong modeling, adequate modeling for students. When you do release them, circulating, and then taking observational data and using that observational data to pull small groups. Right. And I know something that you did mention before was just like, hey, my groups, they need to start changing now.
Yes, because some of them we've been in these groups for about 3 weeks, and I'm noticing that some have really moved forward. In particular, the group that you saw me working with here, Nevaeh, has really elevated. She was a very concrete thinker, and she's actually kind of almost become her group leader in that she's able to pull the students into that kind of that abstract thinking application stage.
Yeah, because they're taking the text
and they're making meaning.
Making a claim, but then using the text to really like back that up, right?
Exactly. And so a lot of them are able to like, well, this is what the text says, and this is what it means, but what does that mean overall? So there definitely needs to be some switch up of groups, and just taking my data and looking at it to change them in ways that are successful. Okay. So we've definitely changed up groups the past few days, and it's been successful so far. We have, I have more exit ticket data to look at, but definitely have seen an increase in the amount of success and just the overall kind of environment of success with doing that modeling, which is, implementing that feedback that you gave.
And that's something that I just talked to Haley about too, like not too long ago, like, because she said that's one of the things she talked about during her observation, is just making sure, like, you are modeling adequately for kids before you release them and let them. Yeah, we want to let them grapple with stuff, but I mean,
and that's why I think for me as like the teacher, where I've got to do a lot of that. I am growing in like modeling versus like giving versus rigor, and just kind of grappling with all of that myself.
Definitely modeling, not giving.
Right. Still showing, modeling, but not
giving,
and then them lifting.
Yes, afterwards, giving them an adequate enough. Modeling, and then saying, it's your turn now. Still the I do, we do, you do, just in a different way, right? So in your upcoming lesson for Monday, or no,
Tuesday.
Is this for Tuesday?
Yes, 12.
Yep. Well, that is for Tuesday, because you guys are, I won't be here tomorrow, and I won't be here Friday, but on Tuesday, I will, and I'll come back and look for that. And I guess, where do you think the best opportunity would be to do exactly as we talked about? We just said modeling, circulating, pulling small groups. So where would you do that here?
I would do it in Station 1. Obviously, number 1 will be a great place for me to do that explicit modeling and thinking. Of course, they will already have read and annotated that text as their launch. And then I will be able to come in and model and really do that explicit thinking, that explicit teaching on number 1. Okay. And saying, well, Barack Obama says you're not a varsity athlete the first time you play a new sport. You don't hit every note the first time you sing a song. Why does he include these examples? How do they contribute to the meaning of the paragraph? That'll be a great time for me to say, well, Barack Obama is saying this, and I think that means. And so then there's my thinking, and then my modeling will be me actually going through the process of like forming an answer, looking at that mistake, any mistakes that I might make, kind of rerouting my thinking and actually putting that ACEs onto the page and modeling that on the doc cam.
And it's so funny that this question, I'm looking at your exemplar response, this is a question that you can relate to the task at hand. And talking about like, hey, us as writers, we don't always get it the first time. Like the first few times might be a doozy. But like,
and especially if I'm like, sitting there editing like, well, I wrote this, I don't think that's great because it doesn't really back up, and I'm like, well, look at the process that I'm going through.
Yep, connect that to the writing that's happening. It is an easy way to help make a connection for them. And then, so then at that point.
And so then I could, release them into number 2, and at that time, start walking around, getting that immediate data and pulling that group so that before they go on to station 2, which is forming that evidence-based claim, I can pull a smaller group and say, hey, we're not getting it, we can't move on because we're not able to take our text and make full meaning of it yet.
Okay.
And so I think that will be a good place for me, to do that while the rest of the students work towards station 2. Because if they're mastering station 1, then they're ready to move on to station 2.
Okay. All right, Taylor, so that's cool. I will follow up with you on Tuesday. I'll come in, I'll look for that technique. I'll send a follow-up email of this too. But basically, we're looking for adequate modeling, circulation, full small group, and make sure that's an opportunity for you to model again, but at the same time, ask questions that elicit that thinking.
Right.
Make sure they make that thinking visible on paper before you release them back.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Okay.
All righty.